And not to go too far into history, but in just before this nation was born as a country, Benjamin Franklin lamented in a pamphlet called something to the effect Observations on the Population. And what he was lamenting was the influx of Germans, right? It was like incredible. The Germans are going to destroy our culture, they're going to destroy our language, their complexion is swarthy. You know, you hear a lot of politicians and a lot of spokespersons for the anti-immigrant movement who say, you know, I'm not opposed to immigrants, just illegal immigrants. You know, my grandparents came here legally. Well, you know, I just gave you a quick synopsis of the history of immigration, and we saw that until 1924, right, there was really no immigration law, right? So most of their ancestors, grandparents, and etc. did not come here with papers, right?
Let me get to the speaker for the evening, because I've been keeping him too long already. Luis Valenzuela. We've been doing some work with Luis on some of the immigration issues that have been coming up in Suffolk County recently. He was one of the driving forces in stopping a bill in the legislature, the Suffolk County legislature, that made no sense. The bill was titled by many of its opponents as the Standing While Latino Bill, because basically it would charge people for the undefined crime of loitering, and we were afraid that it would be used to profile certain members of certain communities and not others. Those are my words, not Luis's. He will explain it as he sees it, I'm sure. But we did work with him in opposing that legislation. It was extremely successful. From my view of what happened, he was one of the leaders in getting that legislation stopped and getting the legislators to understand why it was a bad idea and why it was also unneeded. We've asked him to come speak tonight to give us an update on the status of immigration on Long Island, where our changing community stands, and where it's going. Dr. Valenzuela, if you want to come up and say that.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to come and chat with you for a little bit. Indeed, Ian and Kimberly and a whole host of progressive people across Long Island helped to defeat this this bill that targeted specifically and very clearly Latino day laborers. One of the things that we suggested about the bill was that the bill would lead to consequences that were racist. It's clearly a discriminatory bill, clearly targeting a select group of people, and for no other reason than the fueling the anti-immigrant sentiment that's prevalent on Long Island and specifically in Suffolk County due to the county executive's anti-immigrant platform in Suffolk County. Incidentally, that sentiment, as you know, is prevalent throughout the nation. But that sentiment is undergirded by an anti-Latino sentiment that runs a little deeper. And to illustrate that point, I'll talk to you a little bit about the Latino population on Long Island vis-a-vis this anti-immigrant sentiment. When the word immigrant comes up, what is the picture that pops into your head?
Pilgrim.
Pilgrim. You got that right. See, that's why I said you don't have to ask this audience. And incidentally, it's great that you brought that up, because supporting us in the defeat of this anti-immigrant legislation was the Shinnecock Nation. And in fact, Elizabeth Haley, one of the most respected elders of the tribe, of the nation rather, said something to the effect, you know, when your people came here in the 1600s, we didn't have this type of bill. As a matter of fact, we helped you. Very humble, but very powerful. Whenever the word immigrant is brought up, immediately in the heads of people pops an image of a Latino, and specifically a Latino day laborer. And the problem with that is that the day labor population on Long Island, only makes up maybe 25,000 to 80,000 persons. Across Long Island, there are maybe 455 foreign-born persons, right, that reside in the island as of 2004. There are, as of 2004, 330,000 Latinos on Long Island, right? The majority of Latinos on Long Island are citizens, right? So, like 51% are citizens, and out of the other 49%, there are Latinos who have legal status. But that already breaks us down from the foreign-born population of 455,000 to a Latino population of 330,000, with about 151,000 being U.S. citizens. And you can see this all in this report. I'm going to leave some copies for you, the Adelphi report, and it's titled the economic impact of the Hispanic population on Long Island. Is that about 59% of the Latinos that are here on Long Island come from other states, and principally come from, the metropolitan area around New York City and other parts of New York. I believe that this whole issue is undergirded by an anti-Latino sentiment, movement, and etc. And you can see that in some of the comments of our legislators here in Suffolk County and across the net, and other people of influence. The talk show hosts from Lou Dobbs, whose program masks as news, but it's really just commentary. And people like O'Reilly, Hannity, Jones, all of those, and on the radio, Limbaugh, who pollute people's minds with the idea that with every other Latino that either enters the country, that Latino joins this magical army to reconquer Aslan, the land that was taken away from the Latino population back in the 1840s, right? But they have this kind of hysterical presentation about Latinos. One of the things that we were looking for was national legislation, right? We all know that the immigration system is broken. And if I get a chance, I'll speak a little bit about my perceptions of what the immigration system functions as. But the system is broken, and it needs repair. Now, the fact that national legislation is not going to happen anytime soon bodes ill for Long Island. So, on Long Island, this sentiment is fueled also by economic anxiety. All right, we all hear that our children are moving off the island because they can't get jobs that pay a living wage and they can't afford housing. And one of the things that some of our elected officials do, and people who have influence in terms of capital, is to distract people from finding solutions to real concrete problems that they face each day. So, for example, the method of distraction in scapegoating immigrants is the economic contributions that Latinos make to the Long Island economy is something like $5.7 billion. All right? So if all Latinos were day laborers, if all immigrants were Latino day laborers, do you think that Latino day laborers in the year 2004 would have been able to make a contribution as significant as $5.7 billion? The answer is a collective no, right? The argument that that Latino immigrants are bankrupting our schools, our tax revenues, our health care, it's all smoke and mirrors. It's all a method of distracting people from the true economic anxiety that they feel. So, for example, just in terms of corrections, right, which population in jail, healthcare and education from K to 12th grade, Latinos contribute more than they take in services, and this includes the undocumented population. The undocumented population, just by the way, is very hard to measure and count, and we can get into that if you like. But the difference is something to the effect of each Latino resident contributes $619 or so more to the economy of Long Island than they take in services. And that's not all that difficult to understand. There are push and pull factors for immigration, right? And push factors are social factors that happen in a country that push the population off the land. So, for example, we've always been told about the Irish potato famine, right? At pushing like 3 million Irish persons off of Ireland. That's a push factor, right? And a pull factor would be coming to the United States, where there are plenty of jobs, and a developing nation to accommodate them. Some of you who know the Irish history a lot better than I do know that while there's some truth to that, there's also some fiction to that. So, for example, during the height of the famine, while the Irish population was starving, there was shiploads of produce leaving Ireland for England. So you go figure how this works, right? But it takes you right quickly to what's happening in the last, 30 years with the increase in immigration from Latin America to the United States. So we think about the wars in El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, and when you think about those wars, you need to be thinking about neoliberalism policy, right? And how that exerts a tremendous influence, not only from the United States to Latin America, but across the globe. And you see the tentacles of that policy being played out right now in Afghanistan, Iraq, and et cetera, maybe 50 other countries where the U.S. is involved in armed conflict. And then what are the pull factors, right? Well, again, employment, et cetera, and the desire of families to realize this American dream that's still sold across, the globe as something that's achievable. But anyway, in addition to these wars, we have multinational corporations that are not only driving foreign policy, but also making foreign policy. So you have things like NAFTA and CAFTA, which forces people off of their land. And I'll give you a good and very recent example. Mexicans, right, who gave the world corn and who have been subsisting on corn for thousands of years, are now not not only to produce their own corn, but to buy their own corn. Because with these policies, corn has been dumped on the Mexican market at such a rate that it's cheaper to buy the import than to grow corn. So maybe something like 3 million Mexican farmers have been thrown off the land, so where are they going to go? I remember those pull factors, right? So it's no accident that the largest group of Latinos whose population is increasing here now is Mexican. Remember this, that I'm saying that this institution of immigration, the immigration institution, is also easily seen as the institution of racism. So you have institutionalized racism. Because as you'll see in a moment, what starts to happen with the influx of Southern and Eastern Europe and Eastern Europeans is that the earlier immigrants somehow or another get transformed magically into being white. So they start to lose this European stranger kind of thing, right? So like the Irish were not considered white neither in this country nor in Great Britain, especially by the English, right? The Germans, as you saw, even starting with one of our founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin, had that kind of thing, and with the Chinese and French. So by the late 1800s, some of the folks who had been former immigrants would say things like, hey, you don't see an Irish person working on the roads, on the streets. It's all Italians, right? So that same type of sentiment is going on, and it's always fueled by those factors that I was talking, push and pull factors. I mean, but somebody's getting rich all the time. Somebody's making a lot of money. So that by 1921, 1922, the first immigration law passes, and it's what's called the Emergency Quota Act. And that bill sort of like restricted immigration from Eastern and Southern Europe and Southern Europe. And it of course allowed for more Northern Europeans to come in, of course with the exclusion of the Irish. Last year in January, there was a study produced, and this study mimics it that I'm going to leave with you, in North Carolina about the economic impact of Hispanics on the state of North Carolina. And what that study showed was that the Hispanic population contributed something like $9.2 billion to the economy of the state of North Carolina at a cost of about $106 per resident. It's something that totaled like $67 million. So if you're a businessman, wouldn't you go for that kind of business? You know, 9.2 billion as opposed to 67 million, right? The immigration bill that the Senate had just put out was a horrible bill. It was a horrible bill. So in a way, we have to take credit for defeating it. What we were opposed to was that the process shut down, and that the process didn't continue because, you know, there is a crisis for immigrants. But within that bill, just quickly, they were going to do away with immigration based on family preference to immigration based on a point system that would favor the more highly educated, right? People who had advanced degrees in science and etc. And one of the things that we suggest is that, you know, that's all well and good, but why not use some of those resources that we're expending, you know, killing people, polluting the environment in Latin America, and educate our own population? Why can't we bring, you know, our population to the educational and skills levels that are needed for not only our current economy, but for our future economy? The immigration bill, the Senate bill that just went nowhere, right? Well, that bill had one good feature, which sort of like responded to the request of the American people. And again, you can see this throughout polls throughout the nation. And the majority of people in the nation want the situation of the undocumented immigrants to be addressed. And the majority want the 12 or so million who are here to be given the opportunity to earn citizenship, right? And that poll is split between, how harsh a process of earning legalization is or becomes. But anyway, so one of the good features of that bill was that it would give all immigrants who have been here since like January of 2006 the ability to apply for legalization and to earn a path to citizenship. So that was one good piece of it. Now, but it had a lot of conditions, and that population would have to jump through a lot of hoops. And one of the hoops was what they call a touchback provision, right? So if you were undocumented and you wanted to apply for citizenship, you first had to get what they call a Z visa, and it was like a temporary work permit, which was great because you could do the same things that anyone who has a visa can do, like a temporary work visa, etc. But that touchback provision is really difficult because it said that the head of household was the only one that was required to make that kind of touchback provision. And it was that you had to go back to your country of origin and then to reapply legally to enter the country and to get in the process. And in addition to that, you had to pay fines, and the fines were going to be quite problematic. They were somewhere between something like $13,000, $18,000, to finalize the process. And it was going to take something like 8 to 14 years. You had, whoever it was, and of course fairness, you had to go to the back of the line. So the millions of people who are on queue right now in the immigration process, who are waiting in their countries or who are here and have applications in process, all of those folks on that line had to be processed. And the estimate by the Department of Homeland Security was that process would take something like eight years, right? But not only that obstacle, but there were some other obstacles. And another one was that they had what were called trigger provisions. And these provisions were basically enforcement provisions. So before the process in dealing with the human need could begin, the immigration had to certify, or Homeland Security had to certify to the Congress that the border enforcement was up to speed, right? And now that's euphemism for the militarization of the border, right? And that had to do with more fences and vehicle barriers and those drones that they use in Afghanistan and Iraq, flying over the border. Thousands more border patrol, and a whole bunch of those things. Plus, Congress had to be given certification that a process of identifying immigrants, but we think all people had to be in place. So with the biometric identification cards, and that biometrics includes fingerprints and iris scans and all of that technology. And the cost to this is, in terms of dollars, was going into the billions. But the cost in terms of human suffering was probably incalculable. One of the things that happened was, and you guys are all familiar with this, the Democratic Party did not want to step up to the plate for fear that they wouldn't get reelected and put any kind of real pressure. So there were amendments that kept being added to the bill. There were like hundreds of amendments. And some of the amendments would in effect cancel out that first provision that I said was probably the only good thing, and all the subsections under it were pretty bad. And that's the legalization of the 12 million or so. There's one of the provisions was that what we call a report to be deported. So what that meant was that provision said that any undocumented person who registers, following this law, if it was enacted, that information could be used to track them down and deport them if their application was not approved. And it's like, who's going to be that stupid? Right? You're going to go and report yourself? Because you have to sign waivers and acknowledge that you were in the country without authorization. Like from the pro-immigrant rights movement, the sense is that nothing comprehensive is going to pass, perhaps for 3 or more years, right? And there's just been some talk now that leaked out of one of the congressperson's staff, that even if you got a Democratic president with a Democratic Congress, they're not going to risk in their first administration implementing comprehensive immigration reform. So it would be at least 6 years into that administration. One of the good things that just happened last week was that a federal court in Scranton, Pennsylvania, ruled unconstitutional the Hazleton Ordinance. Now in Hazleton, Pennsylvania, a town that was rebuilt by immigrants, all of a sudden, through their spokesperson, he became the spokesperson of the town, the mayor, introduced an ordinance, which is one of the most repressive ordinances against immigrants, and basically Latino immigrants, which would fine people for renting, employing, doing virtually anything with anyone who did not have authorization. And that case was overturned by the federal judge, saying that it was unconstitutional for 2 reasons. One is that immigration policy is the purview of the federal government, and local municipalities like our county executive here does not have the authority to enforce or implement federal law. So we want to see what the ramifications of that law are. And the other thing that the judge said was that just because a person comes into the country without authorization does not rob them of the protection of the Constitution. So that person is not immediately stripped of any protections. Please call your congressperson, call your senators, call your legislators. We keep hearing from lawmakers who are our allies, and of course it's beaten into us by people like Peter King, that they get hundreds, if not thousands, of calls against immigrants, supporting restrictionist and xenophobic and racist practices and legislation for everyone that's pro-immigrant or pro-social justice. So I don't know where our calls go, or where our letters go, or our faxes, or our email, but it's incredibly important for us to call, and to call like every day.